Hello, and you are listening to Eco Justice Radio. Our show presents environmental and climate stories from a social justice frame featuring voices not necessarily heard on mainstream media. Welcome, I am Jessica Aldridge. On today's show, Glyphosate, Killing More Than Weeds, host Carrie Kim will be interviewing Kelly Ryerson, founder of Glyphosate Facts. Kelly Ryerson works at the intersection of agriculture, nutrition, and health. As a writer, speaker, and policy consultant, she started the site Glyphosate Facts, an educational resource to help spread awareness of the health impacts of chemical agriculture. She has a BA from Dartmouth College and an MBA from the Stanford Graduate School of Business.
Phosphorus and glyphosate-based herbicides have been in the news lately since, Mr. Trump's executive order. You know that guy who's engineering a bombing campaign with his friends from Israel. Well, he's doing other things. We're going to talk about the bombing campaign in later things, but it's weighing on, I would say, all of us, an entire nation, and it's extremely concerning. But today we're going to focus on some other things that the present administration is working on. They're talking, Mr. Trump had an executive order calling for an increase of phosphorus and glyphosate-based herbicides, an increase in their production rather than banning, which we have all been working on for literally decades. Why would we want to ban them? Because they are dangerous to all of us. Yes, they might increase some agricultural productivity, but at what cost? That's what we deal with around here. At what cost? We have done a number of shows here on the fact that these chemicals are linked to an increase in multiple types of cancers in humans and have a whole list of detrimental impacts on ecosystems, insect populations, wildlife, water quality. The list goes on. The word is agricultural productivity. That's what they talk about, and that is anything having to do with productivity, money, and of course, influence trafficking, which is big money too. And those of us here who are fighting for health of our ecosystems and our very selves just don't have the money to put up to say this thing should be banned. Glyphosate, Roundup should be banned forever. And because healthier alternatives to growing, providing food, we've featured a number of advocates, farmers, scientists on this show who push for regenerative organic farming. There's an incredible movement for it. Maybe it won't replace all farming, but it could replace the majority and certainly ramping up production of dangerous herbicides like glyphosate is something we need to stop. So we had Kelly Ryerson, Glyphosate Girl. She specializes in glyphosate, although she doesn't call herself that as much anymore. We had her on the show in 2023, and we thought we'd feature excerpts of that interview again as she covers the basics about glyphosate, Monsanto, Bayer's Roundup herbicide, and its impact on environmental health. Here's her update, which she recently posted on her Instagram page, Glyphosate Girl.
Okay, time for a check-in because this has been quite a week in the glyphosate world. If you follow my account, Glyphosate Girl, you likely know that last week there was an executive order to increase the manufacturing of glyphosate domestically under the umbrella of national security. Now, of course, we know that we really have a national security issue in that we have an entire agriculture system based on chemicals, and that those very chemicals are also at the base of our chronic disease epidemic and creating a future of infertility. So that is the actual national security issue that's going on. However, this executive order is only one small piece of the larger picture going on that is the real crisis, and that is this this push from multiple different areas for a pesticide liability shield, meaning that if a liability shield passes, we will not be able to sue pesticide manufacturers if we get sick from exposure to 57,000 different pesticides. This is being pushed at the state level. In North Dakota and in Georgia, you can no longer sue pesticide manufacturers if you get sick from exposure. They're trying to do that in a lot of different states. Just last week, the Farm Bill came out from the House Ag Committee, and lo and behold, there's pesticide liability shield legislation in there, as well as some expanded shield and stripping our right to do any kind of local pesticide regulation or restriction, say around schoolyards. They want to take that away so that our kids can also be exposed. I mean, it's sick. And the other thing is that the head of that House Ag Committee, G.T. Thompson, also is someone who's out there on the regular talking about how pro-life he is and how nothing's more important than children and making sure that we can have lots of babies. And I'm looking at that and how do you reconcile that with the very, very chemicals that are stripping our ability to have babies, creating miscarriages, all of this evidence that this is what's happening. So the hypocrisy is astounding. But there is some good news that Thomas Massie has come out with a bill, and it is called the No Immunity for Glyphosate Act. It's in direct response to the executive order. It's a bipartisan act. I love it because, as we know, poison is nonpartisan. Shelley Pingree, Lauren Boebert, Nancy Mace, Ro Khanna, Anna Paulina Luna, all signing on as co-sponsors for this bill. So we're going to keep an eye on that. Also keeping an eye on the Supreme Court because the big glyphosate cancer case finally hits the Supreme Court where it never should have gotten in the first place. But if Bayer wins that, which it seems like the White House is signaling they hope that they do, then we will not be able to sue pesticide manufacturers when we get sick. So a lot is on the table right now. It's exhausting. Please stay tuned because we're going to have more calls to action.
This is Cultivate Elevate 2 on Instagram, talking RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and his interesting Trump decreed perspective on the Glyphosate for Food Security executive order. It's a major disappointment, but maybe not so much of a surprise considering what's happened to our former friend, RFK Jr., who has done some incredible environmental campaigning. I've had him, at different events that we've featured. He's been a good influence up until recent years. He seems to have lost his way in some ways, but and this is another example of that. Cultivate, Elevate 2.
So it seems RFK was on Joe Rogan's podcast to talk about glyphosate. Let's play the clip.
If you ban glyphosate overnight, or if you got rid of it, or if somebody else cut off our supply, it would destroy the American food system. And
how crazy is that statement? The entire system is based on using the poison.
Right.
So he said that the food system would collapse if we didn't have glyphosate. So here's a list of all the countries that grow food without glyphosate. How do they have food then? And on top of that, glyphosate is linked to diarrhea, vomiting, skin and ear irritation, respiratory issues, physical symptoms such as the throat burning, and then cancer. So we keep them? So instead of banning the poison, we're going to sell the farmers laser machines that are hooked up to Elon Musk. They also have the internet, GPS, and they cost $1.4 million per machine. Does any of this make sense? And it's also wild how the administration can't seem to talk to the Amish, but they can raid their farms when they grow everything organically without robots and Wi-Fi. There's also Joe Salatin, who doesn't use any Bayer Rothschild chemicals on his land, and he grows everything organically. What an epiphany.
Maha Action, that's Make America Healthy Again, has posted this clip from Robert Kennedy Jr. talking about the Supreme Court possibly granting immunity of the glyphosate makers and other noxious chemicals from liability. That's coming up in April. RFK Jr.
He understands the problem, too. We all understand that this is a huge problem. So the president was dealing with national security, and they did something that I really don't like, which is to support. There's a lawsuit about that's now before the Supreme Court, but in the lower court they supported that is asked for federal preemption. So that would mean that if the federal label says that this is safe, that these state lawsuits now cannot be brought. So it would throw out a lot of the state lawsuits, and it effectively gives them immunity from liability, which is, to me, it's not good to give any company immunity from liability. It takes away all incentive for them to make the product safer. Again, the president is dealing with bigger issues, which is the company that's making this has paid $11 billion to, in my lawsuit, they're just about to sign another $7.6 billion settlement. There's 65,000 cases out there, and they've said, we're getting out of this business, if we don't get relief.
Aloha, this is Carrie Kim. Kelly Ryerson of Glyphosate Facts joins us to share what we need to know and do about glyphosate, a harmful yet widely used herbicide ingredient. We thank the Tongva ancestors for their continuing presence, legacy, and stewardship of this area. Our show comes to you from the homelands of the Tongva and all of their relatives. Herbicides, glyphosate, one of the most common ingredients in herbicides and the main ingredient in Monsanto's infamous weed killer, Roundup. Roundup is one of the world's most widely used herbicides. Monsanto is now owned by pharma giant Bayer, as most of you may know. In 2015, the International Agency for Research on Cancer classified glyphosate as probably carcinogenic in humans and confirmed to cause cancer in lab animals. However, the EPA continues to maintain that glyphosate is safe for human use, despite multiple studies demonstrating otherwise. Roundup and glyphosate-based products have had devastating impacts on our food systems, agriculture, public health, and ecosystem in the broadest sense. Introduced as part of the 70s Green Revolution, Roundup was touted as a product that would help address poverty by increasing crop yields and agricultural production. Glyphosate radically altered the face of farming on this continent. Small family farms, once the norm, were quickly overshadowed by the industrial farms of big ag and big chem. Herbicides, GMOs, monocropping, and soil degradation became the standard over biodiversity and soil health, to which we attribute current astounding rates of chronic and degenerative diseases. Cancer, including non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, digestive disorders, diabetes, obesity, autism, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, allergies, kidney, liver, and autoimmune diseases are often correlated with widespread use of glyphosate, as well as reproductive issues, infertility, and sperm count declines. While glyphosate continues to be a planetary health emergency, we as a collective can catalyze change by making informed consumer choices and advocating against chemical products and farming practices that cause irreparable harm. Plaintiffs have begun to win in court to redress harms they suffered from Roundup. However, it will take many more of us to fully eradicate not only glyphosate, but all toxic chemicals for planetary health. Kelly Ryerson is here to show us how we just might arrive there sooner. Welcome to the show, Kelly.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here to talk about this.
Thanks for your irrepressible commitment and conviction to eliminate glyphosate from our environment in our lifetimes.
Yes, hopefully. That is my goal.
You sent us a picture which says, Roundup gave me leaky gut. Can you tell us about your own health journey related to Roundup? I'm assuming there is a story there.
Yes, there certainly is. Usually people don't wear t-shirts around that say Roundup gave me leaky gut, although people have asked to buy that t-shirt, so maybe I should be printing them. So I, like many Americans and actually people globally, I started feeling just really off and really sick in different body systems. And it was just really hard to assess what was going on with me. But just to give you an idea of some of the symptoms, it started really with fatigue, just being really too tired and not excited to get up and do things anymore. And I had a baby like a few years earlier. And so you can kind of attribute that to, maybe it's being a mom with a young child or whatever. But it became sort of more than that, where I was having really strange tingling in my hands. I was getting headaches. My vision wasn't great. I had rashes on my body. And my digestion was just off. I couldn't keep on weight. Just these things were starting to accumulate that definitely were scary, frankly. And I saw my primary care doctor, who was Stanford and Harvard trained. And so I had utmost trust in this physician because of her education. And she completely failed me and said with each visit I'd make with a new symptom, and she thought that I was a hypochondriac because the lab tests weren't showing anything wrong with me. I was like, but I know I'm having these symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear so many of my friends now talking about this kind of thing. And so I knew something was up, but having your doctor tell you, no, nothing's wrong with you, you are imagining it, can actually make you kind of go crazy. Mm-hmm. And she said, I think that you're depressed and you're anxious and you have a young child. And so after going to about 20 specialists and no one being able to tell me otherwise, I finally went to go see a psychiatrist because I thought maybe I'm nuts. I mean, at that point, anything to get relief. And I went to see the psychiatrist who happened to have intake blood work on me. And he happened to have vitamin panel on it. And it's not something that had even crossed my mind. No doctor had tested for it. And it came back and I was so deficient in all these key vitamins and minerals.
Wow.
Just entirely deficient. And like shockingly third world level deficiency. And it didn't really make sense because I had access to food. So I was really floored and took that information, and new doctor told me, I think you should try going gluten-free. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, well, that's strange. I thought that was just sort of like, frankly, a Hollywood trend,
Yeah.
And annoying maybe, or like hippie, and I don't know, just annoying.
Right.
And so, but I thought, well, you know what, I'll try anything at this point just to feel better. And I went gluten-free and I started feeling better. And I started like supplementing back the vitamins. And I'm like, what the heck? What is it about gluten that's doing this? So that opened up a whole new world. And I went to a conference, a big celiac and gluten sensitivity conference in New York. And some scientists were saying, we don't know what's behind this epidemic of gluten sensitivity, but we don't think it's actually the gluten, because if you sterilize gluten and you give it to someone who's gluten sensitive, they don't have an inflammatory response. So there must be something else going on.
Okay.
And that was the key moment that I said, well, what else is on this wheat? And it turns out that glyphosate, which is once again the active ingredient in the weed killer Roundup, is sprayed over all of our non-organic grains in harvest. Mm-hmm. And so we're all eating this chemical, and all of us are consuming grains probably more than anything else. And it's just led to this huge epidemic of chronic disease. So I'm happy to say that I'm healthy now, but it was a long road, and it is a long road to figure out what it is that's causing it when Western medicine is telling you, you're crazy.
Right, exactly. Well, is that what compelled you to launch Glyphosate Facts? Like, how long afterward did you really become an advocate for, removing glyphosate?
So it was interesting. At the time this was happening, it so happened that there are a bunch, and maybe you've heard of them, but there have been a lot of trials for cancer trials around this chemical. And it's been very clearly shown in published research that this can cause non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. So exposure to Roundup can cause it, specifically glyphosate, the active ingredient. And so I went up because I live in San Francisco. That's where the trials were. Mm-hmm. And so I went up because I just wanted to see if there were going to be protests, because Monsanto, the owner at the time of Roundup, is a notorious company that just people have hated forever, because they just are the devil in a company for making poisons. And it's just crazy. So I went to San Francisco, which, by the way, is historically a very passionate place with all kinds of protests. And there was not a single person that was there. Mm-hmm. And I was so shocked. And so I walked right into the courthouse. I sat right down with the lawyers and said, hey, I'm here because I wanted to hear about the trial. Uh-huh. And no one was there covering it on a day-to-day basis. And so I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to blog each day of this trial, because there are a lot of secrets about Monsanto that are coming out. And so I first founded the blog Glyphosate Girl, because industry hides it like crazy. And if you criticize what industry is doing, so in this case, Bayer, because Bayer bought Monsanto in 2018, then they will go after you like trolls and say you're crazy. So it's a tricky road.
Yeah, the information is instantly suppressed. Kelly, we're going to take a quick break right here, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about Roundup as a mineral chelator.
Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you're enjoying Eco Justice Radio. Stay connected by subscribing on all major podcast apps or visit our website. That's ecojusticeradio.org. You can check out previous shows and guests and listen to extended episodes. You can also get connected with us on social media. Today you are listening to Glyphosate, Killing More Than Weeds, with host Carrie Kim and guest Kelly Ryerson. founder of Glyphosate Facts.
Dr. Alexandra Munoz posted this testimony from U.S. Representative Thomas Massey of Kentucky. Now, Thomas has been doing incredible work. The good old Epstein files are out there, thanks to him and Ro Khanna. And he really is stepping up against this glyphosate push and so many other things. He's really one of the few bright lights. I don't agree with him on everything, but I have to say I'm extremely impressed with his advocacy in recent days. Here he is talking glyphosate.
This government is under siege. All three branches of this government is under siege by lobbyists and lawyers from a German company named Bayer. They spent over $9 million lobbying the executive branch and the legislative branch so that they don't have to be liable for any damages that their herbicide causes, otherwise known as Roundup. And they're having some success. Now, they haven't had any success yet in this chamber to get that immunity. They've had some success in the state legislatures, which are also under siege, to get this immunity from liability. Look, the Constitution guarantees people a trial if they've been harmed. Why are we contemplating going against the Constitution? The Attorney General has opined favorably for this German company in front of the Supreme Court about getting rid of any liability that they should have for any damages. And the most recent thing that we've seen, the executive branch. By the way, the president's chief of staff and the president's attorney general work for one of the biggest lobbying firms that's received hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars from Bayer. And maybe that's why we've seen an executive order that says that the production of this chemical from this German company is a national defense priority. And we know why they're doing that. It's to keep them from having any liability. Everybody in this country deserves their day in court. This is wrong. We shouldn't succumb to the lobbyists, not in the executive branch, not in the judicial branch, and certainly not here in Congress and not in the state legislatures. But there's a lot of money at play. And I implore my colleagues to resist it and do not give them immunity.
So, Kelly, we're back. Could you explain? I know it's kind of like going to the beginning, but for people who, because we've said a lot of people don't even know that there's any harm in Roundup and they have it sitting in their garage. So could you explain the relationship of Roundup and Roundup Ready GMOs? It's really very kind of elementary stuff, but it's important for people who don't know much about glyphosate already.
Yes. And it's such a good question to ask because I was very confused when I started this. I didn't realize how very connected GMOs are to Roundup. Frankly, didn't know anything about anything with agriculture or what I was eating. So it's very interesting. So glyphosate so Monsanto launched Roundup, which with glyphosate in it in 1976. Mm-hmm. And they then put it on the market and it was mildly successful and still second to a different herbicide, but people liked it and people were buying it and using it residentially and farmers were using it. But of course, they're using it to spray to kill a weed on a farm, but they have to be really careful around their crops because if you spray it on the crop dies. Right. So Monsanto's patent on glyphosate was set to expire and it was one of their blockbuster products. And so they knew that they needed to change something in order to keep on making profit. So that is when they started to develop these genetically modified seeds. Mm-hmm. And they said, this is the future because we're going to be able to create this food using genetically modified seeds and they're going to have better yields and they're just going to make the farmer's life easier. And, all this amazing accolade towards what they call, they say it's biotechnology and, I guess it is biotechnology, but so now when you see biotechnology as it relates to agriculture, usually they're talking about GMOs. So they launched in 1996. They said, okay, so we need to be sure we keep on selling Roundup. So we're going to launch this. We are going to genetically modify a seed so that when a farmer plants it, it can grow and you can just spray Roundup on top of the crop and it won't die because it's been bred to be resistant to the effects of glyphosate. Mm-hmm. So they did this with corn and soy and cotton and those are the three biggies in terms of genetically modified seeds that are they're called Roundup Ready seeds because they are ready to be sprayed and they won't die. So then that exploded. So they launched that. GMOs took off like wildfire in the United States, quickly became the dominant form of corn and soy that we have here, and cotton that we have in this country. And just that you see the use of glyphosate explode in parallel with it.
And that was 1996, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting because I traced back to when I started having just some kind of everyday digestive problems. And it was in 1996. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, maybe that's what that was. That was the launch.
Well, it's amazing to think that this has been, that glyphosate has been around for really 5 decades now. And then, but also, like you said, to talk about the explosion of it when the Roundup Ready crops seeds were developed. So, you know, and I think we've already had like this first wave of GMOs. And now we know we're kind of getting ready to see like, I think a second wave. People have already been talking about that. But I wanted to ask you if you could also share how Roundup or glyphosate is used in agriculture as a desiccant and explain what a desiccant is. And then that kind of traces back to all the conversation you had about grain products. But
yeah, absolutely. So around actually the same time in the late 90s, early 2000s, the farmers realized, oh, this also is extremely effective at drying out a crop all at once. So when someone is farming grains, it is hard at harvest time because on a typical field, the grain will mature at different rates from one side of the field to the other. So when you are all set and you're going out and you want to be harvesting, it's much easier to have everything just ready to go. And you do one fell swoop and cut all your grain and you're just done. Right. So, but that actually throughout history hasn't been the way that it's done because that wasn't possible unless you could kill off all of it and dry it all out at one time. Mm-hmm. So that is where Roundup came in and farmers realized, okay, we can take our sprayer out there, spray it all so that it dies. And then we'll go in with our combine and farm it and harvest it. And so they harvest it, it's put in the combine, it's processed then at the mill, and then it's directly put out into food producers' factories. So the step between being sprayed with Roundup then to our bread or these other grain-containing foods is really quick. And it's estimated that over 80% of our dietary exposure to Roundup is actually through this process of pre-harvest spray. So the GMOs are one component, but probably our dietary exposure is much more through this process of spraying the grains. Now, in terms of GMOs, the GMOs, interestingly, most of it goes to animal feed, which is something I didn't realize at first. So a big chunk of it goes straight to animal feed. And that is why you'll see so many very sickly animals. Right. And you have another component that's going in when you're at the gas pump and you see like 10% ethanol. That comes from genetically modified corn. Right. And so it's processed into that. We export tons of it to Mexico and to China and for their animal feed. And then this smaller portion, like 9% or something like that, goes into foodstuffs. So that's where the high fructose corn syrup comes from. They take the GMO corn and they process it to a pulp and send that on its way to be our sweeteners. So it's not great.
And that's why people who are also carnivores or omnivores need to really remember what their animals are eating in those GM crops or in the Roundup sprayed crops. You know,
absolutely.
In all the different places, it's like 6 degrees of Roundup.
It totally is. And it's so sad. I had the opportunity I went and watched a GMO corn harvest one time with a very nice farmer, and he had a neighboring CAFO, so like an animal factory with cows that are very sad and packed in. And so it was harvested, and then we drove over there, and I just looked around at these cows that were just so incredibly sick, just the mucus running out of their noses and so just lifeless. They're eating that poison. So it's just really heartbreaking. It's not the way we should be processing our meat at all or growing our meat. Terrible.
Definitely not. Well, I also understood or read that even those foods that are organic can have this pre-harvest spraying. And that's why I think people who just think, oh, I'm just buying organic and everything is fine. There's the drift. And then there's also the pre-harvest.
Yeah. So drift is certainly a problem. So certainly some grains that you find that are organic, if you went and brought them to the lab, you might find that there's some glyphosate on it. But in terms of actually being sprayed with this process, that shouldn't be allowed in organic.
Right.
Now, do people sometimes lie? Maybe. It's unless the USDA
Who really knows,
typically sends an evaluator out there to assess, is that really what's happening? And actually the mills now, because there's a little bit more awareness, some of the mills aren't wanting to take grains with glyphosate on it.
They are not wanting to do that?
They are not wanting it.
That's
And
good.
which is great news because it comes from them to put the pressure on the farmers. And so they'll keep little sacks of each delivery of wheat. And so they can go back and test it and see, did you actually spray it? Were you lying? Now, this is not all mills. This is just a few, but I like the way that's going.
Is that for their own exposure, that they're protecting their own health or the health of their families, people on their farms?
I think it's straight up because people like Kellogg's and General Mills are wanting them to not be having glyphosate grains, or else they're going to buy from a different mill. So I think it's only an economic decision, but it's a good one. Okay. And that ultimately comes from the pressure from the consumer. So
sure, it's actually we know it's a bottom-up movement. So Kelly, we were just talking about Roundup and the dietary exposure to glyphosate. And now I wonder if you could speak a bit more about Roundup as a mineral chelator and what that means for our soil and nutrient density.
Absolutely. When glyphosate was introduced, glyphosate was first discovered in the 1950s, and it was a chemist that was looking for different applications for pharmaceuticals. And glyphosate was discovered. They couldn't find any type of pharmaceutical application for it. And so then someone else figured out, oh, wow, this is really an effective chemical that can be used to bind up different minerals. And so we could clean pipes with this. We could put it into boilers, into metal pipes and put it in there, and it'll collect all these minerals. And then you can clean it out really easily. It was so effective. That is definitely a key property and characteristic of this chemical, is that it's excellent at binding to key minerals. And so now what we have is the fact that our soil has been so drenched in this, whether it's GMOs or desiccation, but all across this country is just been completely drenched in glyphosate. And so when glyphosate is in the soil, it has that same property. So it will bind to these minerals like zinc and magnesium and copper, all these things that our body really depends on. It'll bind to it and not allow it to be available for the crop to take up. So typically in farming, in food, the plant will derive all the nutrients from the soil.
Right.
But if they are not available in the soil, then the crop's not going to have them. And so we may be eating something that looks like, say, a strawberry or looks like a really beautiful cucumber, but it highly likely does not have those nutrients that it always should have had and were designed to eat. And that is how we become extremely mineral deficient in this country. And I know, for example, one of the big things for me personally in health, and is a hot topic, is just how magnesium deficient and zinc deficient our population is. And those are very, very critical to behavior and being calm and not being depressed. And when I look around and I see this frenetic and everyone's upset and everyone's sad, and maybe not everyone, but it seems like a lot of people these days. And it just makes me feel that everyone should be forced to take a magnesium and zinc supplement.
Well, not to mention immune function, right? We speak about zinc and speak about our immune health. But I wanted to shift a little bit our conversation, because Bayer will be removing Roundup from consumer shelves in 2023, correct? But there are still generations of people that are completely oblivious to Roundup's harmful effects. So what do you have to say about, so it's removed from the consumer shelves, but we know there's kind of a shell game going on where it will just appear in a different form under a different name. We know that Liberty is another product that's out there now that maybe started out from Bayer, and I think another company, like a Canadian company, bought that. But I don't know if you could speak about the change that is just this shell game, that it was in this form and now it's going to show up in this other form, but that doesn't mean it's gone.
Yes. So as part of a lot of the lawsuits that Bayer was on the hook for came from residential users of Roundup. And so they were developing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, mostly from dermal exposure. And the way that Roundup works, it can go right through your skin because of the way the formula works, and get the glyphosate can get into your bloodstream and really accelerate non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in certain people. And so because so many of the people that were suing them, it was well over 100,000 people suing because they'd been exposed to Roundup, and then they had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And Bayer just had massive billions of dollars of settlement that they agreed to just to settle these cases and not have them go to court. And as part of their way to protect themselves from further litigation, they said, okay, well, we're going to take this off the shelves for residential use, glyphosate containing herbicides. But we don't think that it causes cancer. We're only doing this so that you can't sue us and blame us for it.
And no liability.
Yeah. And so in 2023, they were supposed to, and I don't know, they didn't actually say a month, but I was looking, I'm constantly, when I'm at Home Depot, I'm looking to see what the contents are because Roundup will still be available. It just won't have glyphosate in it. And so they're bringing in other things. And I know that 2,4-D, which is half of Agent Orange, actually, it's a component of that, which is highly toxic. And dicamba, which is also extremely toxic and can lead to neurological disorders, are on the table as replacing glyphosate. So you're right. Like, they take glyphosate out, but it's going to be more of the same. And people will be buying Roundup still, not realizing anything changed, probably for most people.
Right. Well, I think that's something that Zach Bush has often warned of, that the thing that would be coming afterward could be worse than the glyphosate that we see now. I mean, we don't want to be in just like doom, kind of like a doom scrolling conversation, but at the same time, we have to be vigilant at the same time. How do you see justice prevailing when regulatory agencies that are meant to protect us, the EPA or the FDA that's kind of following the EPA's direction, are captured by corporate interests?
It's heartbreaking to see just how captured they are, to such an extent that I'm not sure we need them at all. I think that taxpayers shouldn't pay for them.
Right.
And I'm really sad about it. I had 2 opportunities to go and approach the EPA with a group under Moms Across America. And Zach came to both of them and a few other scientists, and we presented just binders of research, literally, we were handing over to them of the damage that this chemical causes. And both times they said it's anecdotal. And it's not anecdotal. These are peer-reviewed, excellent pieces of research, and they're opting to ignore it. And it's just, it's so incredibly frustrating. And in terms of the GMOs now, the FDA has decided that instead of regulating them and seeing whether GMOs are safe, they instead tell the company, you tell us if it's safe. You do some studies, we'll advise.
Do your own studies. Do your own studies.
Do your own studies, and we'll say, okay, yes or no, but they always say yes, And so one thing that I was concerned about actually with the Roundup coming off the shelves in Home Depot and other residential or hardware stores is that they put a caveat in that they can only take it out if the EPA says it's okay, their new formulation is. And so they're in cahoots with the EPA. So I wouldn't be surprised if they just kept on selling glyphosate, based in Roundup. So it is very frustrating because I just have personally felt at wit's end about the regulators and really don't understand from a moral and ethical standpoint how they get up in the morning. It's not all of them. There are actually some people that are great there, but the leaders are really bought, and they get up and they go and they approve these poisons knowing that we're all drinking them and eating them.
Right.
So
it's collusion. Yeah. And it's like the interest, whether it's political interest, academic interest, and it's money. If money weren't involved, this wouldn't be happening.
Absolutely.
This wouldn't be happening.
And I was so heartbroken because there's a really fantastic functional doctor who's the one that discovered what exactly the mechanism was that gluten can help facilitate or causes or accelerates leaky gut. And so I went up to him and I asked him, hey, would you be interested in looking to see if glyphosate if it's part of the issue here? And he said, oh, it definitely is. But I work for Harvard, and Harvard would never let me study that. And I was like, that's really depressing. He's like, it is. It's just the way the money works. It's
kind of the strange golden handcuffs to the extreme.
It is. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we're going to honor the break time because I'm just seeing that. We're going to come back and speak more about generational exposure to Roundup and why the harm is greater for those who are exposed in later generations.
Hey listeners, quick break here. We hope that you're enjoying Eco Justice Radio. Stay connected by subscribing on all major podcast apps or visit our website. That's ecojusticeradio.org. You can check out previous shows and guests and listen to extended episodes. You can also get connected with us on social media. Today you are listening to Glyphosate, Killing More Than Weeds with host Carrie Kim and guest Kelly Ryerson, founder of Glyphosate Facts.
So, Kelly, we're back. Could you speak about, many people may know, many listeners may be familiar with the Lee Johnson case. He was a school groundskeeper and the first one who brought Monsanto to trial. And he had contracted non-Hodgkin's lymphoma due to Roundup exposure. And I know in his case, there was evidence of ghostwriting that came up in the evidence. And I'm wondering if you could talk about ghostwriting and kind of that compromise.
Yeah. IARC, so the International Agency on Research in Cancer, they are an organization that's Europe-based, so they're global contributions to it. And they meet every so often and they look at commonly used chemicals and they assess whether or not they cause cancer. And usually these types of assessments are done by regulatory offices, and that's why they're corrupted. But this is an academic group that is apparently pretty clean and they are not bought off. And after looking at all the research, they thought, okay, this definitely appears to probably cause cancer on many different studies. I mean, just a huge group of studies. And Monsanto didn't like that. They saw it coming. And so as soon as they saw that IARC was going to be looking at it, they realized this is probably going to come back, that it causes cancer. So what are we going to do? So what they did was they hired an agency to get a few scientists who are toxicologists to look at these studies and just cherry pick and adjust the data to make it look like it definitely does not cause cancer, and then publish it just under their name. So not these independent scientists, not Monsanto, to make it appear to be third party.
Right.
And and actually that wasn't the first time that they'd done that. They'd done that earlier on. They really messed with some of the science. And what the documents showed that were revealed through this trial is these back and forth emails between the scientists, to the point that you could see that the chief toxicologist was in there editing the research paper to change the language and just flat out writing a lot of it and then saying, okay, great, now you can publish it. And then if you go and you look at the EPA to see what research they depend on to make their evaluation, that paid research from Monsanto that Monsanto wrote is there as a point of reference.
Right.
And it doesn't just end in academia. You also have Forbes famously printed an article, although this happens practically every day, it seems, where some news organization is paid off to go in and put a great story about Roundup. And there's a retired professor actually from Stanford by the time he was at Stanford, and he was paid to write a very esteemed article in Forbes about the safety of glyphosate and what a ridiculous situation is that this is under persecution. And you know what? It's successful. It's very successful PR and a really successful tactic. You can get away with that for a long time until someone decides to sue you, really.
Right. Well, I think people want to believe what they want to believe. And it's actually almost in some ways easier to believe that it's not toxic, that it's not harmful, because then you don't have to be concerned about so many other things. But it's not the truth. And you have to be an astute researcher on our own, because we know that we are being kind of fed in our searches and so forth. You really have to be able to dig through alternative sources of media and know where to find the truth that you're seeking.
It's hard. It's really hard to do, and it takes time, and most people don't have time to do that. So.
Well, I wanted to ask you, as we talked about, there's been tens of thousands of cases that have been settled, and Bayer has paid out a lot of money for those settlements. But do you perceive that as a good or detrimental thing? Because once the cases are settled, they essentially are invisible, versus these cases that are high profile, and it really highlights the toxic nature of Roundup and glyphosate.
I'm really disappointed that so many are settled. And what Bayer is doing now is they actually, so the original legal teams, there were 3 original cases that went to trial, and they were the ones that hit headlines. And this was 2018 and 2019. Yes. And it was so great for the Roundup movement, for all of us, and really a godsend. And they were having this great success. Now, those legal teams that were doing that were outstanding. The ones that, being both sides, but particularly those that were representing the plaintiff. And in watching them, and particularly Brent Wisner, perform, and it felt almost like a performance because it was so beautiful and so articulate and just really brilliant. And I don't see how a jury would ever disagree with him.
Right.
And Bayer very quickly realized that they never want to go up against someone like Brent ever again. And so they rapidly started settling. And Brent and now it's Wisner Baum is the name of his law firm, and the Miller Group, another law firm. They did not want to be taking on cases that were shaky cases where that person has non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, but it's not like each case of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is from glyphosate. Right. And so they didn't want to take those. They wanted high quality cases. Now those high quality cases were settled out of court and for a decent amount. But there were all these, and still are, tag-on lawyers who don't specialize in glyphosate, just saw this as a potential to make a lot of money. So they're taking any case that they want. And so now I think it's up to 4 wins on the Bayer side. Okay. And they're making it very public. They're saying, see, it doesn't cause cancer. Right. But the quality of the case was, of course, you're going to come to that conclusion. So it's disappointing because actually the original legal team had a case ready to go in November. And it was like the day before that Bayer said, okay, no, never mind. We don't want to do it. And I was disappointed because I wanted to see them toasted again.
Sure. Well, hopefully there will be more cases like that. I'm sure there's plenty more out there to come to litigation. But, even as the Roundup litigation continues, Bayer seems to be doubling down on herbicide usage, as we've already kind of discussed. And in 2019, Bayer promised to spend $5.6 billion over the next 10 years on herbicide research. So would you make some comments on that?
Oh, my gosh. Yes. Oh, okay. And hearing all the things that they proposed. So one of the things they proposed in settling is they said, let's just put a pause on all cases, and then we'll appoint an independent group of scientists to assess whether it causes cancer or not. You can trust us.
Right. That are on our payroll. Yeah.
Yeah, totally on our payroll. Yeah. I mean, ridiculous. And so anytime you see any of these, it's not just glyphosate. If anytime you see any of these chemical companies or, pharmaceutical companies that are promising, oh, let's do more research, that's just a delay tactic. They know that they're in trouble and that if they really did the research, it would not look good for them. So it just, when they say that kind of thing, it just cracks me up. And now the judge actually that was handling the vast majority of the federal cases, he didn't really understand exactly what they were up to in the beginning, but now that it's been so many years, he'll laugh when that kind of thing is proposed.
Well, and
is refreshing.
Right. Yeah. And appeals as a tactic. And what about appeals as a tactic? Because, they keep wanting to also appeal certain cases and, they don't want to pay or they want to keep going on with the case.
Yeah. And and so they were counting on the Supreme Court coming to their rescue. And so they've been appealing. So it would start locally in the San Francisco case, the courtrooms, and then it would be appealed all the way up through California Supreme Court, and then up to Lee Johnson or actually some of the subsequent cases were then appealed. Lee Johnson, I actually don't think was, but the 2 former were put up to the Supreme Court. And it was so amusing because the Supreme Court, first of all, sent the case over to the Biden administration to see whether or not they thought that they should hear the case. Can you imagine? Right. And so then the White House came back and said, we don't think you should see the case. And actually, those of us that were watching, we had no idea because all of the politicians are bought off by them. It's not like it's a party situation. Yeah. Democrat or Republican doesn't matter. And so it was how much was Bayer in there able to threaten them to make the Supreme Court hear it.
Collusion at the highest levels is what we say,
Completely.
But the good thing to know is that there's many, many millions of people that are working in the direction of what we wish to see. And that will continue. So people are, even as this is happening, I think we are undaunted and the regenerative movement just continues to grow. You can't keep people down forever. So, biotech, but on that note, biotech, big chem and big ag are joining forces and they are exploring ways to combine quote unquote organic herbicide applications with robotics and AI. And the claim is that these robotic arms and camera-based applications will more precisely pinpoint weeds versus crops or the soil. Does this seem a bit shocking? Because we know that we can address planetary health by simply practicing smaller scale regenerative farming en masse.
Oh my gosh, thank you for saying that, because it just seems like these companies are trying to make economy where there doesn't need to be one. They're just trying so frantically to innovate just to get a cut of some kind of profit when it isn't really that necessary if you went back to regenerative organic agriculture.
It's kind of the biotic versus abiotic conversation. So there is that move. It's like there's two different camps, those that are going back to the land, restoring the land, regenerating the land, and those who are choosing more this kind of abiotic, divorce from nature route as much as possible. Just make it all mechanical.
Absolutely.
So.
And in fact, one of the incredible inventions that I saw a blueprint for was drone bumblebees.
Oh, I haven't seen that one.
Which is scary because there aren't enough bees to pollinate. So, got to do something.
So the drone bumblebee. Okay. So it's kind of like going into, I know that they're also making synthetic microbes. So these are the things that once that starts entering the ecosystem, how long does it take to eradicate that out? How through the gene, the legacy of genes, how long does it take to change that? Just like with GM salmon. I mean, these things are in our ecosystem now, or the GM mosquitoes. So it's just huge conversations. But in the meantime, we have to just keep going on and keep kind of bucking what's coming forth.
Yeah, and do our best.
So Zach Bush often speaks about the fact that exposure, the third generation exposed to Roundup or glyphosate is exponentially more harmed than the first generation exposure. I don't know if you could elaborate more upon that, why that is. And
upsetting study came out that showed in rats, when you give female rat Roundup or glyphosate at dietary level that is comparable to what we might be exposed to, and then she has her babies, and then those babies have babies, deformities start showing up in that second, in the grandchild and great grandchild generation, even if only that original mom was given glyphosate. So just that one feeding changed particularly the endocrine system and made some DNA modifications, genetic modifications that then aren't showing up for a time. And yeah, I think this is when Zach is talking about how we have this Roundup generation coming up, we don't know. And I know for one, when I was pregnant, I was eating all kinds of things with Roundup. I mean, probably more than the study showed. And that's just so scary because we already see how ill our children are across the board. And so if that's how this generation is, and Roundup, so right now we'll start to see it a little bit more, because just given that it came into the market in 76, but really starting to eat it in the 2000s, we're going to get more of a picture of just how harmful it is. And if we can even do anything about it, or if anyone will be willing to attribute the disease that we see to this. And that's just so incredibly sad. And I think another aspect of glyphosate is that when pregnant mom is ingesting it, it's actually a really shocking study that came out. So the scientists studied in the second trimester the urinary levels of glyphosate in that mom. And when the mom had the babies, it was correlated that the higher the level of glyphosate in that mom in that second trimester, the farther the distance between the vagina and the anus in the female fetuses, which is androgenization. So that is just a really terrifying conclusion of that, it won't be funded to study anymore, but we know how much it can accelerate and even cause miscarriages, having it, infertility, because with the infertility piece, it's really incredible because it's been shown that glyphosate does cross the blood testes barrier and causes early sperm death. Mm-hmm. So you have all these people that are wondering, why can't I get pregnant? And oftentimes it's the sperm quality, but people aren't questioning, well, what is it in the sperm that's doing this? It might be, maybe we're exposed to all the time. And I don't just think it's glyphosate, it's other toxins as well. I actually sent 3 sperm samples out to a lab to find out what the glyphosate content was of relatively healthy guys. And all 3 came back with glyphosate in their semen, all 3. And that is just very sad, because knowing very well with a few of my friends who have struggled with infertility, it's just such a heartbreak.
Because not only the quality of the sperm, it's also the counts, correct?
Exactly. So the early sperm death is not going to be helpful with that.
There was a recent study published in the Journal of American Medical Association, and it had found that glyphosate rates were up 500%, and then the average levels were up 1,200% in people over the last 20 years. Oh. So It's pretty astounding, how prevalent it is. But it does make perfect sense when we speak about the generational exposure and how people used to eat. And when was glyphosate introduced? When were the Roundup Ready crops introduced? And so it makes sense why these younger generations are so much more susceptible to the harm.
And I'm thinking all the time because my daughter, she lost a baby tooth, and I decided to send the baby tooth into the lab, and they found glyphosate in the tooth.
God. Oh my God.
And so that baby tooth formed when she was in utero. So I'm like, okay, so is she completely composed of glyphosate on her cellular and bone level? It seems that would be probable given what some of the scientists have found also in the bones of the animals that are fed the GMO and Roundup drenched food.
Do you think that I don't know if urine tests are useful? Do you think that urine tests are useful for people who think that they have heavy glyphosate exposure? Is there any value to that?
Well, I've kind of wondered because they can be expensive. And so what is it that you're going to gain from it? And
what do you do with the knowledge once you have it, right?
And for some people, and for me, when I first did a glyphosate test on the early days, it was shocking to read it. And I think I was able to internalize it more as like, this is proof that this is in my body and I don't like that.
Uh-huh.
But I can't imagine someone not finding it in their urine.
Right.
So I guess it's like, well, how much is it? I had a whole lot more in my urine, even when I'd gone organic, than average European had, for example.
Well, I'm sure we have the worst worldwide, I would imagine. I don't know, though, if that's true, but I
can imagine it. So, yeah. Apparently, Japan also has a large problem with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's often said that to make effective change in society, 25% of the populace needs to change its consciousness or behavior. And then only then do policies actually begin to reflect this change. Does this feel true to you?
Oh my gosh, what a great statement that is. That's excellent. It completely, oh my gosh, to get to that 25% would be just phenomenal. That is exactly the goal. Mm-hmm. And I so often wonder, and this is what I work on really day in, day out. And it's like, what is the tipping point going to be? What is it? Is it a large PR campaign? Is it just telling everyone and anyone who will listen that this is a problem without sounding hysterical and like a strange person? Because still there are plenty of people that can't even imagine that this is happening because it just seems a wild, far-fetched thing.
And then they find contrary evidence if they do their own search.
Easily. Yeah. If they do their own search, then they'll find any of the top 5 PR groups that are out there to say how safe it is and probably list me as a crazy person.
I searched on you first. And then when I searched the next time, all the studies that were coming up were like, oh, it's not harmful. It's not harmful at all. And then I could really dig to get back to your website. I know how it works.
But I really feel strongly, and this is sad that this is the case, but at least in my case, I was unwilling to make any dietary change really until I was on my knees in chronic disease and had no other choice.
Why is that?
Isn't that a shame? And I loved my I loved Oreos. I loved not thinking about it. I was feeling good, and that's why I landed where I landed. And so, but I do think, as I say, the demand for functional integrative medicine right now is through the roof. Like you can't even get an appointment to most of these doctors because people are looking for answers. And I was just recently actually in a doctor's office, and on one of their list of things that they do test for is glyphosate. And I thought, well, that is a big step because 6 years ago when I was starting, it wasn't the case. Like they weren't looking for that. And
and there's a perfect storm with the pandemic too, because a lot more people suffered. I mean, I think it was really evident that many, many people were ill and that their immune systems were compromised and so much of their health was compromised. And I think that just showed, I was reading about the oxidative stress components, of course, inflammation related with glyphosate. And then you pair that with the pandemic,
we were really well situated as a country to have a horrible, horrible experience with COVID just because our immune systems were so shot. And that, that's the other thing with glyphosate is that it specifically works on our microbiome in almost like an antibiotic would. And it doesn't impact our bad gut bacteria, but it kills off our good gut bacteria, proven in science. And I know the biologist who did it, so no fighting about it.
Right.
And that significantly lowers as I'm sure you know, the microbiome controls so much of who we are. Mm-hmm. We're really just a shell with just lots of bacteria in there dictating it. And so when you have something going in there and killing off that good gut bacteria, our immune system's shot, our moods are off. Just there's so many implications on that. But to your point too, I have seen a big shift because I was glyphosate girl well before COVID started. But I think that COVID did indeed open eyes because it is no longer a far-fetched idea that this could happen. Right. That we have this weed killer on our food and that maybe it has some health impacts. So that's just refreshing when trying to just inform the public that maybe there's a little bit more of an opening. I
think people have decided to take more responsibility knowing where their food comes from. And a lot more people have become invested in growing their own foods or getting back to the lands. I mean, it's definitely a trend for sure.
Oh yeah. It's so fun. And I converted my front lawn to be growing my it's the only space I had. So it's like, well, here it's going to be, neighbors like it or not.
They'll be coming to you for food when there's a food supply shortage.
No, totally. Then they'll be happy.
You're right. Then they'll be begging to be your friend. No, it's easy to want to place blame or become angry regarding the state of farming and planetary health due to glyphosate and all the other evidence of collusion and corruption and greed and power mongering. But action is more powerful than anger. And at this juncture, what are actionable things listeners can do to empower the change we want to see?
Absolutely. So my feeling is that most definitely the strongest thing you can do is buy things that are organic or they're regeneratively organic, or go to your farmer's market and talk to your farmers and find out what they're doing. And even if there isn't a big organic sign on their stand, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are spraying pesticides, because sometimes it's just expensive or a hassle to get that certification. So they just don't. Mm-hmm. And if you go there and you're supporting these small farmers, you start to reverse this massive corporate monocropping system. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these farmers will go out of business because they just don't have a big enough market. To the point that even if you go to Whole Foods and you buy something that's organic, Driscoll's strawberries, for example, they're grown on tarps in a very non-regenerative way, like very
monocrop soil.
Right. and so, but they're the ones that get the grocery space in Whole Foods or wherever it is. And I've seen them at Safeway too.
Because they're so large.
They're so large and they can provide regularly, the strawberries at a good price.
Right.
But they're not healing the soil and they're not making it extra nutritious or anything like that. So going and supporting those farmers so that they can have a business is really the most impactful thing you can do. Second, I would not dismiss how impactful it can be to write the companies that you are interested in seeing be glyphosate free and be doing things more cleanly. Mm-hmm. I know that the glyphosate residue free certification, the demand for that process has skyrocketed recently.
I haven't heard of that. That's amazing.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah. And so on a few different bags of things recently, I saw some rolls and they weren't organic, but I looked on the back, I saw that and I was just over the moon. And not only that, they were gluten-free, which for me, that combo is heaven. And so looking for that and writing to the companies, and that sounds like, I don't know, it's kind of annoying. You just might feel like you might send it off and never hear anything. And you might not, but they are listening, just given the fact that we know that the mills are responding to this. Mm-hmm. So going back to that pre-harvest spraying, the mills know that Kellogg's doesn't want to have this grain have glyphosate on it. And why is that? Because lots of people were complaining about it.
Consumers are beginning to know, and they are speaking up, and they're voting with their dollars. Simply.
Yes. The premium you can get if you get in there and you have a great organic product or a glyphosate-free product is significant. It's super significant. The only reason why these conventional farmers with the corn and soy and chemicals can even make do is because there are huge government subsidies to keep them afloat.
Mm-hmm. Kelly, could you share with us about your website and how listeners can be connected with you and stay abreast of whatever it is that you are doing?
Yes, absolutely. So my website is glyphosatefacts.com, and you can just get some bare bones information that hopefully is clear to you, or if you want to make a presentation off of what is glyphosate, if you're a student or to your community, you should be able to access the information there. And if you want to come and follow me on Instagram, that's where I'm most active. And you can hear my various reels of what's irritating me that day about glyphosate. And so that's at glyphosategirl.com, and you can DM me, and I'm pretty responsive. So thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, Kelly. It was such an important conversation because really there's not a person on the planet that isn't affected by glyphosate. Like, I think we would probably find that in every single human being on this planet.
Completely. Absolutely.
So it's up to all of us also to change and eliminate glyphosate from the ecosystem.
Absolutely. Thanks for giving me a chance to talk about it.
Yes, thank you again, Kelly, so much for all your work. More power to you.
Hey, listeners, to check out the extended recording of the show or to explore other shows, visit our website, ecojusticeradio.org, and also subscribe to our podcast. This has been Eco Justice Radio and the show Glyphosate, Killing More Than Weeds. Thank you to our guest, Kelly Ryerson, and thank you to our listeners for joining us. Please connect with us on social media. You can find us at Eco Justice Radio, SoCal 350, and Adventures in Waste. If you like what you heard and you want others to be informed, subscribe and share the episodes. You have been listening to Eco Justice Radio, a project of SoCal 350. Executive producer Jack Ite, producer and co-host Jessica Aldridge, co-host Carrie Kim, and engineer and original music by Blake Quake Beats. And until next time, remember, the power is yours.